This is Kat Klingensmith with Retro Crime. It's our annual Christmas episode, and buckle up for this fun ride. On Christmas Eve in 1963, in the small town of Jeanette, Pennsylvania, it was a cold, foggy day with a sprinkling of snow. Lucille and Elmer Chester were fighting, which was the most normal part about their day. Lucille was 42 years old and had 3 grown children from her first marriage, which was when she was 15 years old. Those children now had babies of their own. 45-year-old Elmer was her third husband. He also had 3 grown children. The Chesters had been married for 12 years, and their fighting escalated with each anniversary. That day, they were fighting because Lucille needed the car for some last-minute Christmas shopping. Elmer refused to let her take it on grounds that the roads were too icy. Instead, Lucille took a taxi, and Elmer agreed to pick her up in town. He never showed up. After waiting long enough for him on a cold day, she went to a tavern that he frequented and found him there. She asked him to buy her a drink, and he refused. They fought about that. He drove her home, and they fought about how recklessly he was driving. At home, they fought about dinner being late. At 10:30 at night, they were in the living room, still fighting, and Elmer threatened to hurt her. Lucille warned him that it would be the last thing he ever did. She retrieved his .38 caliber handgun from the bedroom, returned with it, and Elmer asked, "Well?" Lucille shot the gun 4 times, hit him twice, once in the shoulder, once in the neck, then called an ambulance. By the time they arrived, Elmer had bled out. Lucille was arrested, and the local district attorney charged her with first-degree murder. Upon finding this story in an old newspaper, I began searching for further information, but I was searching in the wrong direction. The term is availability heuristic, meaning the last time I heard about a woman finally leaving her jerk husband after 12 years, it was only because she had met someone else. I made a hasty generalization here, and none of my research was adding up. I was looking to see if Lucille quickly remarried or had another child. Lucille didn't remarry for a few more years. That was to a man 3 hours away in Ohio. That doesn't scream passionate love affair. Long-distance phone calls back then were too expensive for that kind of chicanery. I ran this by a dear friend of mine who is far more insightful than I am, and she said, "I think she just had enough." I pointed out how odd it was to be so desperate to go shopping on Christmas Eve that Lucille was willing to take a taxi. It sounded like she was meeting someone. My smart friend pointed out that she has done last-minute shopping on Christmas Eve, and come to think of it, I have too. It was even more common 60 years ago when people went to the market for fresh food for Christmas dinner. Refrigeration isn't what it is now. I grew up with my father still calling the refrigerator the icebox. My friend was spot on. When women kill their husbands after over a decade of marriage, the majority of the time, it's because they were finally overwhelmed by too much abuse. There was a stressor, and an opportunity presented itself. Christmas Eve is stressful for people with presents to buy and wrap and meals to prepare. Lucille was a pressure cooker that day, with a lid waiting for a reason to blow. Elmer gave her that by threatening violence. That means that she was a survivor of domestic violence. She pleaded not guilty on grounds of self-defense. The defense's entire case was that she was protecting herself from abuse, but the judge denied her a fair trial by not allowing any proof to be submitted of Elmer's abusive behavior. The prosecutor admitted that, by all means, Elmer was a bad husband, but having a poor character isn't a reason to shoot someone. He tried to charge her with first-degree murder, and instead, she was charged with voluntary manslaughter. The typical sentence for that was 6 to 12 years, and Lucille was given 12. Her lawyer filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus. Habeas equals have, corpus equals body. It's our right to not be unlawfully detained. Lucille wasn't allowed to be out on bail while awaiting her appeal. If she had been charged with first-degree murder, that would be standard. But the court failed to prove first-degree murder. For voluntary manslaughter with no history of violence or means to be a flight risk, bail should have been set. The judge denied her appeal. After nearly a year in lockup, Christmas time came around again. The judge who sentenced Lucille did something weird. It was like a bunch of ghosts had visited him and showed him his incompetency. He released several prisoners he had sentenced, including Lucille, and gave her probation instead. She moved back to Ohio, where her family still was. She married her fourth husband and divorced him 6 years later. She had lots of grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. She joined the CB radio craze of the 70s and 80s. Her handle was 1.5. At the ripe age of 85, she died in a hospital. When there is a home with domestic violence and someone gets killed, it is almost always because the husband's abuse had escalated to that point. Men usually kill their wives, not the other way around. Women are better at suppressing their rage. It's why they're the ones nature designed to have the babies. They've evolved to be better at handling hormone shifts and sleep deprivation. For men who abuse, it's hard to get them to stop because it's rewarding to be abusive. When their wives and children live in fear, they can do whatever they want. They can have whatever they want. They scare their families so that they don't have to deal with the consequences. Like Elmer Chester on Christmas Eve, they can have the car when someone else needs it. They can drink at whatever time of day. They don't have to fulfill any responsibilities to anyone. And when they want dinner, they can threaten violence until they get their way. They create free servants. So what gave Lucille Chester the moxie to be one of the rare women who kills her abuser first? Well, let's learn about her. She was born as Celia Bowers in a small town in Ohio. Lucille was her nickname. When she was still a toddler, her father, Vernon, ran off to live with his girlfriend. One drunken night, he insisted on going somewhere, and his girlfriend wouldn't let him drive until he quit drinking from the flask in his pocket. In his inebriated state, he found her request unreasonable and shot her dead. He couldn't believe what he had done and sobbed uncontrollably. He was 29 years old and got 25 years for killing her. In March of 1930, when he was 34 years old, he broke out of prison and returned the next day around noon. He claimed he went haywire. The prison staff suggested it was to see his kids because his wife had sent letters saying that they were sick. I have another theory. I suspect it was a ruse to get divorce papers signed. By the time the census was taken a few weeks later, Vernon was divorced. During a time when divorce was rare, Lucille's family had been surrounded by it since the 1800s. Parents, children, grandparents, grandchildren, almost all of them were divorced and remarried at least once. Many were like Lucille and married several times. Those they married also came from families who remarried and divorced frequently. It wasn't easy to get a divorce in the late 1800s to mid-1900s. Ohio was a more lenient state in that drunkenness alone was considered grounds for a divorce. From their driving records, it sounds like alcohol played a starring role in everyone's lives. How was it possible for a family and their social circle to have so many remarriages and divorces in their families for generations? It has to do with why divorce was uncommon. It destroyed reputations. Women were punished the most. A divorced woman was considered morally inferior and undesirable, especially if she had kids. This made her hard to remarry. That says something profound about Lucille's social circle. They were people who didn't have reputations to ruin. I had a hunch where this crime took place, and with enough digging, sure enough, Lucille and Elmer Chester lived in a trailer park. The stereotype of trailer trash is still going strong, even though mobile home culture is quickly changing. For the first time, manufactured homes are turning a profit because the housing market is no longer affordable for most Americans. In the Carolinas, people buy parcels of old plantations, put trailers on them, then modify them to look like middle-class homes. Trailers were intended to be quick, temporary solutions to the housing crisis when soldiers returned from World War II. Those temporary solutions made cheap houses for people needing permanent solutions. Their affordability attracted certain types of people, like retired people on pensions. Elmer Chester had retired from the Air Force 2 years prior. He had been a master sergeant and served in World War II and Korea. Their affordability also attracted people who had difficulty buying or renting other places, like people with unreliable finances because they couldn't keep a job or they drank away their income at local taverns, like Elmer Chester. Or they were people considered social degenerates, like criminals, divorced people, and unwed parents. The only thing they couldn't be was not white. Non white occupancy was usually prohibited. They need to feel like they're superior to someone. And because they can't feel superior by their lifestyle, they go by race because it's easier to oppress people who are already being oppressed. There are plenty of low income Caucasians who don't fit the white trash stereotype. No, the white trash subculture tends to live outside of the cities, where the Walmarts are. No matter where they were born and raised, they have the same Southern sounding twang and non traditional grammar. They say things like, I's gonna, or I says, or he don't know. They're all over the country now, but their culture started from the poor farmers and laborers in the antebellum South. Southern society called them white trash because the only social class they considered below them was the one they were enslaving. Ironically, the term white trash was coined by the enslaved population to describe whites with menial jobs. The white trash back then would have made boring episodes of Jerry Springer. Then the Civil War came, and the South sent their poor farmers and laborers to fight for them. They told them that it was about their heritage and rights. It was actually to keep them oppressed too. So long as they could run their plantations on free labor, they could afford all the fertile land and leave the poor farmers to starve. The men between the ages of 17 and 50 were sent to die to defend the Southern way of life, unaware that it meant keeping their families hungry. Poverty meant frontline infantry. The Civil War was the first where the weapons were more advanced than a person's ability to cope with warfare. Most reasonable people cannot handle that much carnage without psychological trauma. Trauma is essentially emotional energy that got stuck. The body wants to keep us alive, so it stores emotional memories when threatened. Even if we don't remember what happened, our body does, and it reacts to things it remembers as a threat, like loud sounds, flashing lights, tones in people's voices. The young men who were lucky enough to return home came back as alcoholics and morphine addicts, desperate to calm their nerves. Their trapped energy came out in bursts of anger and violence. People who jump at loud sounds have a hard time around a small house filled with children. Some of these men turned the violence onto themselves, and suicide rates increased. Others turned the violence onto the noise around them and beat their families. Some left. This is where our concept of white trash came from. Wars continued being bloodier than we have biologically evolved to endure, and the front line continued being filled with the working poor. Traumatized people traumatized their families, and their social group turned into one where couples don't get happy marriages, kids don't get happy childhoods, and no one escapes family drama. That's what Lucille Bowers Sheets Allen Chester Walpole was born into. The Bowers were farmers who settled in Ohio in the 1700s. The Civil War came along, and her great great grandfather was a corporal. A corporal's job in the Civil War was to lead the frontline infantry. He was wounded in battle. That's when the family changed. Instead of farmers, they became laborers, and the alcohol abuse appeared, which caused divorces and remarriages, only for the women to continually marry the same types of men, men like their fathers became. Judging from Lucille's driving record over the years, she enjoyed drinking during a time when Ohio looked down on women who drank in public. Bar owners could get fined if they served women at the bar. The women had to go into their own area in the back, and there were whispers of them having low morals. Clearly, Lucille wasn't the kind of woman who cared about what social classes above her said was right and wrong. Domestic violence increases at Christmas time, and it grows worse with each year. Around 40, women start losing the ability to tolerate the same bullshit. It comes with the hormone changes. They stop caring what people think. What did it matter to Lucille if people whispered about her killing her husband? She didn't worry about a reputation to uphold. And good for her for that. What others think is none of our business. So after 42 years of dealing with the same men, Lucille, Bowers, Sheets, Allen, Chester, Walpole, she had enough. The question is no longer why did she do it? It's what took her so long?